He felt like a useless D-rank blacksmith, the kind of person who got laughed at whenever he introduced himself as a hunter. Deep down, he knew he would probably die like a useless piece of shit. If he could just get stronger than anyone, even if he was just a support class, maybe his life could be different. It was the final step that unlocked everything, and at last, Shin Junseo was ready to step into the world as a player. Shin was rushing through the forest, thinking about how he was late on such an important day. He met up with two people, and the girl, who was a C-rank hunter, said that finally he was there. Her name was Kim Jimin. The guy Lim Do-won joked about a newbie being late. Just as he was about to say something about his own experience, Jimin cut him off, asking him not to bring up after all. He was always the one getting late. Shin apologized for being late, and the three of them set off together. Lim joked again, saying Shin wasn't that late after all. Kim agreed, adding that they could just walk the rest of the way since Hyunwoo and Do-yoon were already inside. Shin nodded but couldn't help feeling bad. It had been 3 months since he joined the guild, and this was his first dungeon raid. And of course he ended up late. To make matters worse, he would be there as support, so he had to prove he was useful. When they met up with the other two, Do-yoon asked Shin if this was his first dungeon raid. Shin confirmed, saying he would be there as support. Do-yoon then explained that supports didn't have the same fighting abilities as hunters, so Shin would need to be extra careful. If he got too close to the fight, he could get swept up in it, but if he stayed too far, the others wouldn't be able to protect him. The key, Do-yoon said, was to keep up a distance. Since Shin was a maker, he just needed to stay back, waiting for the signal so he could create a dagger when needed. Shin then asked if it was really that easy, and Do-yoon nodded, confirming that the weapon Shin had was fine for now. Do-yoon also mentioned that it was an easy dungeon and that it was Shin's first one, so he didn't need to overwork himself. Just then, Lee Hyunwoo activated his mana, stating that since he could feel it, there must be a monster nearby. Lim told everyone to get ready for battle and said they would move in formation. Do-yoon turned to Hyunwoo and asked if there were any remarks. Hyunwoo replied that there were 3 small mana signatures and 1 big one. The big one was enough to be considered a boss monster. Do-yoon raised an eyebrow. Normally, the bigger ones stayed within their designated areas. He then said he would take on the boss and told the others to handle the smaller monsters. He asked Shin how long it would take to make a dagger if he hurried. Shin thought for a second and replied that around 20 seconds, but it will only last less than a minute. Do-yoon gave a satisfied nod and said that it was good and asked to start making it now, and they will get this done in 40 seconds. Just then, 3 blue monsters and 1 purple one appeared, charging toward them. Liv immediately took action, raising his shield and slamming it down onto the ground with deadly force. Meanwhile, Kim took out one of the monsters with a swift punch. The other 2 rushed forward to take on the others, but Kim noticed that the monsters were healing much faster than she had expected. She warned the group, letting them know they should be extra cautious. Lim and Lee were already in position, ready with their weapons and magic prepared for whatever came next. Lee used his magic to attack the monsters, launching a fireball that quickly took them out. He seemed pleased with the results, and Lim suggested that Shin help as well. Shin thought the attack order was great, and it was at that moment that he truly understood how the guild fought. Do-yoon called over to him, asking about the weapon. Shin mentioned that everything was ready, but he didn't want to get distracted. He continued making the dagger and threw it toward Do-yoon, who caught it easily. Do-yoon rushed forward, infusing the dagger with dark aura before slashing through the boss monster's head in a single strike. After a moment, the dagger disappeared as it had served its purpose. Lim looked around and wondered if anyone had been hurt. Kim quickly replied that she was fine. Shin, meanwhile, was impressed. The guild was much stronger than he had imagined. Each member was incredible on their own, and their teamwork was flawless. With enough accomplishments, they could easily become a top-tier guild. Compared to them, he felt like he was just someone who could make one dagger, not really contributing much. He wasn't sure if he even deserved to be in the same group as them. Do-yoon approached, patting him on the back and asking if he was okay. Shin denied it, thanking him and saying he wasn't really much help. Do-yoon raised an eyebrow, wondering why he thought that. He explained that because of Shin's help, he was able to save a lot of money. He revealed that his skill allowed him to consume weapons, meaning he wouldn't be able to afford even the cheapest ones on his own. That's why he needed a maker like Shin. It seemed all he needed was a weapon infused with mana to activate his skill. Once again, Do-yoon praised Shin for his work on his first dungeon raid and said he was looking forward to working with him again. Shin felt motivated by the compliment, thanking Do-yoon and promising to do his best in the future. Lim then suggested they take the loot, but before he could say more, the ground beneath them started shaking. Kim wondered if it was an earthquake. Lee quickly confirmed that the cave wasn't collapsing because they had already taken down the boss. Shin pointed ahead and said the wall seemed to be crumbling. Lee used his powers to get better look and confirm that it was like a pathway opening up, with the vibrations leading to another area. As Doriva mentioned the possibility of a secret place, Kim got excited and asked if this was the pathway to hidden treasure. She immediately urged everyone to go check it out. Kim was practically bouncing with excitement, but Lee told them to wait. It wasn't safe to rush inside. Do-yoon asked Lee if he had found anything, but Lee shook his head. Do-yoon wasn't too concerned, saying that the place wasn't going to completely fall apart. They would be quick. Lim, confirming that the guild master agreed, said to let's get inside. Lee, after a moment, agreed to join them. Do-yoon then called out to Shin, asking him to come along too. The scene shifted, and now Shin was running, chased by a monster. He couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong. Everyone except him was dead. This wasn't a monster that should have been in a D-ranked dungeon, and you would never heard of a monster that couldn't be detected by magic. The monster closed in, about to catch him. It landed a punch that sent him crashing to the ground so hard he spat up blood. His hands trembled as he tried to get up. You couldn't die like this. The monster lunged again, and Shin quickly made a dagger to throw at it, but it had no effect. The monster punched him once more, sending him crashing into the ground. The ice beneath him cracked, revealing water underneath. As he fell in, Shin thought to himself, so this was how it ended. D-rank support who can't even use basic buffs like healing. He had finally joined a guild that actually needed him, but here, he was running away like a coward, too pathetic to even be of use. He couldn't help but think that someone else would have been more helpful in this situation. Maybe he should have never become awakened. It was a dream he could never have reached. Then, out of nowhere, a screen appeared in front of him, telling him that he had discovered the spring and fulfilled all the conditions to become a player. Just as he saw the message, a bright light began to shine around him. A screen in front of Shin, showing he had received a new reward and needed to choose whether or not to check it. He wondered about this player thing and the reward. His mouth hung open for a moment as he thought about drinking some water, but then he snapped himself out of it. You don't know what's going on, and honestly, you don't care, he thought. He decided to just select yes. Suddenly, a massive dagger appeared, forming a set of stairs that helped him climb out of the ice and stand up against the monster. The system's voice echoed in his mind, saying he will inherit the experience of his previous life. Reward distribution completed. He used his power to summon several swords, launching them at the monster. The swords hit, and the monster was quickly taken down. Shin was left wondering what had just happened, and he felt unknown memories starting to take root in his mind. Before he could process it, the monster lunged at him. Reacting quickly, he created a giant shield just in time to block the attack. As the monster's punch slammed into the shield, Shin was shocked that he didn't take any damage. Even though it was a golem-type monster, it had incredible durability, but the shield was soon shattered by the monster's next hit, and Shin took a step back. If the information from those memories was correct, he thought even though it's a golem-type, its weak points and the tactics to take it down should still be the same. The problem was the monster didn't seem to have any obvious weak points. Even if it took damage, it had a regeneration ability. So Shin decided to use his skill, Grid World, to get the upper hand. It was recommended that he deal damage from multiple angles at the same time. With his skill as the center point, he could materialize a grid in an equal distance radius. Anything created within this grid could move freely according to the user's will. Shin quickly released the attack, sending the grid to strike the monster from all sides, breaking it into pieces and killing it. At first, Shin thought of Grid World just as an auxiliary skill, something to help him use his creations more efficiently. But it seemed that as the skill's proficiency grew, it could also be used as an offensive attack on its own. The system window popped up, showing that the monster had been defeated. Shin was curious but also confused. Could he not see the information about the dungeon monsters? Suddenly, a purple aura gathered around him, and just as he wondered what it was, a magic ball appeared in his hand. The system notified him that he had activated the passive magic absorption, but he still had no idea what that actually meant. His thoughts wandered to what had just happened. The memories from his previous life were coming back, but they didn't make much sense. He tried to make sense of them. He could clearly remember a few years into the future. In that future, the world had fallen, and there were things too terrible to even mention. Somehow, he had absorbed all the experiences and knowledge from that future. But even though it was a future, Shin knew it probably wasn't the same future as the world he was currently in. There were so many things that didn't add up, and the status screen in front of him was something he had never seen in his previous life. He finally realized that he had really become a player. The term player referred to those few who were chosen and had undergone an awakening. According to his memories, players didn't exist in the world back then. In fact, 2 years from now, only a small number of awakeners would be chosen to become players. A blue screen would appear, visible only to those chosen, and in the future, a mysterious force called the System would shock all awakeners around the world. It sounded almost like a joke, but it was enough to leave everyone in disbelief. The System wasn't the only thing given to players. They also received unique rewards, strength, and skills that went far beyond what they had as awakeners. The system and these rewards came out of nowhere, and once the players started using them, their growth exploded compared to other awakeners. And thanks to the work of the guild leader, who was one of the first to become a player, the Doan Guild, the guild Shin was a part of, was able to grow into a top-tier guild. While Shin didn't have a direct role in that, it was the catalyst for his growth in his previous life. Standing confidently in a developing guild, he had once thought it was convenient when he first heard about it. But now he truly understood how much of an advantage it had been. He thought he could check the skills he would learn and their proficiency in the system window, and it was pretty convenient when he found out about it. If his skill proficiency had transferred over from his previous life, the skill he used on the golem's corpse was something he didn't have back then. He hadn't heard of any other players with a skill like that, so he wondered if it was something only he had. The skill gathers energy from contaminated mana, and he had a vague idea of how to use it, so he decided to think about it later. Then he looked at the other dead bodies and said that taking care of them was the priority. The scene shifts to the Hunter Association headquarters, where a lady asked a boy if they just sent Shin home. The man was confused and asked what she meant. She explained that it was strange. A small guild had attacked an unconfirmed dungeon, and there had been an accident. 4 out of 5 members died, and the only survivor was a D-rank supporter. She says she would understand if he had run away while the other hunters were fighting, but that wasn't the case. He even took care of the bodies and reported everything to the association. Since the gate had already disappeared, they couldn't confirm anything further. She then asked him what he thought, mentioning that something felt off. He asked her if she really thought a D-rank supporter could kill a hunter, then patted her head with a file, telling her to wake up. He reminded her that this wasn't a civilian case and that even if something weird happened, they couldn't really figure out what went on in the dungeon. She mentioned that it was hurting. He asked if she didn't have any other guesses, saying it seemed to happen more often these days. He then started moving away, mentioning that hunters who find a great dungeon and don't report it were a problem. If they report it to the association and it goes to auction, all they get was some prize money. So instead, they risk their lives to go in secretly. After all, it's almost impossible for a small guild to win a bid on a gate. He then told her to just call him if they needed additional investigation or something. She agreed. The man left, glancing at the file and noting that the boy's name was highlighted. He thought that even though he would said all that earlier, it still felt different from a normal case. The whole situation had this lingering feeling that something was off. First of all, the boy's behavior during the investigation wasn't calm at all. He had almost no dungeon experience and had just witnessed an accident, so it wasn't weird for him to be panicking. There were some missing details, but the boy explained everything cleanly. Maybe it was just his personality. Still, something felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. It was frustrating, but it wasn't something for him to worry about now. He would have to go and check things out himself. On the other hand, Shin was walking while using his phone, thinking that no matter how he looked at it, something was off. He couldn't shake the feeling about the unconfirmed gate. The dungeon didn't exist in the memories of his previous life, and when a guild member checked the gate bid form, it definitely had the association's stamp on it. But it was still listed as an unconfirmed gate by the association. Someone must have impersonated the association and tricked the Daewon Guild, or maybe the association itself was involved. What bothered him even more was that it hadn't just happened to the Daewon Guild. As the investigator mentioned, there were already multiple cases involving unconfirmed gates and missing people, and even though he didn't know all the details, he noticed a common theme among all the guilds mentioned in the news. They all had players in them, like guild leader Doyun, and even prodigies who would be called heroes in the future. It seemed like someone wanted to erase the existence of those heroes. That's when he decided he had to hide his abilities for now. He would become the only survivor of a missing person case that would likely remain unsolved. If he acted suspicious, he would get caught immediately. He had about 2 years until the first player selection to prepare. He needed to use every skill at his disposal, and by that time, develop even more. He had to find a way to grow without drawing too much attention. As he checked his usable skills, he found something interesting and clicked on it. A year had passed, and a group of people found themselves in the forest, fighting off monsters. As he struck one of the monsters, his sword broke, and the creature knocked him back. He barely managed to land safely. Suddenly, the monster leaped at him again, and he tried to dodge. Everyone around him was terrified. It was then that they realized the monster was a Null Lord. The boy spoke up, recalling that such creatures only appeared in E-rank dungeons, so it should freeze to death. You would also hear that even among D-rank monsters, a Null Lord was tough to deal with. The monster charged at them, passing him to attack another person. The second boy raised his shield to block, but he was struggling. He warned that if they kept blocking like this, it wouldn't last long. The first boy thought for a moment about the death gods of low-level hunters. The reason Null Lords were called that wasn't just because of their physical strength, but because monsters of that rank were usually weak to magic. No matter how low-level an adventuring party was, they relied heavily on magic. However, the Null Lord didn't follow that logic. Hunters who were usually confident in their low-level magic found themselves terrified for the first time, and the price for their overconfidence and complacency was usually the total annihilation of the party. He knew they only had one pure physical damage dealer, and he was terrible at hand-to-hand combat. His weapon had been completely destroyed, and he didn't have any spare weapons left, so he couldn't understand why the second boy was asking him to attack the monster. If he had known it would turn out like this, he wouldn't have been so greedy and gathered as many people as possible. He hadn't realized that his decision to use as few people as possible and include a magician would cause so much trouble. Then he spotted a boy mining off in the distance, someone who was also a helper. The first boy thought to himself that they already had a helper, but they were all about to die, and yet this other helper was acting so careless. As he watched, he saw the helper's weapon disappear, and he wondered if the boy had any maker aptitude. At this point, he couldn't expect much in terms of quality, but it was worth asking. He called out to the helper, who turned out to be named Shin. The boy walked up to Shin and asked if he was a maker, and if he could make a sword. Shin agreed, and the boy requested a sword, one that was sturdy and strong. Shin apologized, mentioning that he had joined as a helper, not as support. The boy replied, saying it wasn't the time to be making excuses. Didn't Shin see that they were all about to die? Evening would die if they didn't manage to kill the boss. Shin started making the sword, mentioning that there would be one condition. Once they cleared the dungeon, the boy had to forget everything about Shin's abilities. Also, when he received his share, he would have to pay Shin the amount on average support. If the boy was okay with that, Shin would help. The boy scoffed, wondering what kind of quality Shin's sword would be, given that he couldn't even get a job as a maker and was stuck running around as a helper. He didn't think they could clear the dungeon with just any weapons, and if Shin was going to be stubborn, it wouldn't help. Shin responded, laughing. He said it was funny, because good weapons were an essential part of clearing a dungeon, and as long as he had that necessary element, he guaranteed they would be able to clear it. With that, Shin started making the sword. The scene then shifted to the Overkill Guild, one of the 3 major guilds in Korea. A girl knocked on the president's office door. The president called for her to come inside. She entered and mentioned that the Awakeners Association had requested their cooperation, especially due to a dungeon with a rank error. She agreed with the president's assumption that on the surface it was a request for cooperation, but it seemed like they would be willing to pay whatever Overkill asked. The president stated that those other guilds didn't have a choice. She added that there were barely any Awakeners who could enter a gate that had been forcibly closed. The president was watching the news when he saw a report about a group of hunters who had entered a dungeon with a rank error. As he looked at the group's photo, he spotted Shin and thought to himself that he had seen that face before. Then it hit him. A few weeks ago, a dungeon with a rank error had appeared in Sokogan, and the president had been dispatched to the area. He would drop by the scene, and that's where he had seen Shin. According to the report, Shin was listed as a helper. Even though rank error dungeons were still rare, with the survivors of such dungeons being counted on one hand, Shin had participated in 2 parties where everyone survived not once, but twice. It couldn't just be a coincidence. The girl then mentioned that more and more rank error dungeons seemed to be appearing. Just a few days ago, a E-rank dungeon had turned into a B-rank one, and the entire party had been annihilated instantly. The president responded saying that the Awakeners Association must be having a headache over this. The girl added that many people were criticizing the association as it was their job to estimate, analyze, and announce the rank of a dungeon. The president thought to himself that the association must be suffering right now. He then suggested that those with a trespass skill in their guild should take on more commissions for a while and keep an eye on the situation. Then he wondered about the task he had asked her to look into. She mentioned that she had looked into it here and there, but she couldn't find a weapon maker who was a rank or higher. However, she did receive a B-rank weapon from a Japanese blacksmith, and she wondered if the president would want to test it. He replied saying that she knew how any weapon below a rank would be destroyed as soon as he used his skills, and that there were only a few makers who were capable of making higher quality weapons to begin with. He stood up and asked her to look into it for now, as he was reaching his limit of wasting weapons like that. She agreed, and just as she did, someone entered the room, informing President Taehyun that something had happened. Taehyun asked what was going on, and the man explained that he had checked the location of the dispatch request sent by the association. It turned out to be a D-rank dungeon where some of their newbies had entered as part of a free attack team. Taehyun asked about the measured ranks after those entries. The man revealed that it was ranked C, or an upper C rank. Taehyun, looking serious, said that he couldn't afford to lose his newbies, and it seemed like an urgent situation, so he would go there himself. The scene shifted to the dungeon gate, where the media was reporting on the situation.